Hey everybody, welcome back to the Solver School YouTube channel. Today I'm creating a little bit of a shorter video here today, but I am really excited to be able to announce to you all the release of a brand new course that I just created called From Macro to Micro, Building an MTT Strategy Using Data. So often I get messages of people with some comments about solvers, and usually the message has some sort of theme around I get that solvers are valuable. I get that they are showing the equilibrium of a situation and how that data can really generate some useful insights. But how do I actually apply them to build broader strategies? Because after all, each individual spot that you might use a solver for, it's just one spot. And this game of poker is incredibly vast. It's full of a ton of different situations, and you may not ever really face that same spot multiple times. So how do you actually take something that's seemingly as minute and micro as an individual solve and start extrapolating that out to build some broader strategies? And really, I empathize with this email all the time, because when I first started using solvers, I had that same exact question. I saw the value in it, but I really didn't understand how to kind of step back and look at things from a bigger picture perspective and turn that into actually strategies that you can execute at the tables. And that's really why I made this course in the first place. I wanted to show you that, one, you can build broad and simplified strategies using solvers, and two, the exact process for how the best players in the world that use solvers actually do it. So that's what From Macro to Micro is. This four-part data series is a series that just demonstrates this process step by step. I walk through the entire process from actually building your solves at the beginning to looking at the aggregate report data to actually zeroing in on the individual micro data. That's the From Macro to Micro part. And ultimately translating that into some simplified executable strategies. So today I actually just wanted to share a clip from the first video of that series to just give you a bit of a taste of what's actually in the series itself. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the clip.
Let's start talking about just what are my goals and what am I trying to accomplish with this analysis itself. My first goal is somewhat selfish, to be honest with you. I want to become better at multi-table tournaments. For those of you who know a little bit about me, my background is in live cash, and I've really spent the overwhelming majority of my study throughout my time playing poker studying live cash. And, while I still love playing live cash, I work a full-time job. I live about 40 minutes away from a casino, and the casinos that I do live close to spread, for the most part, relatively lower limit games. So the cost-benefit analysis really just isn't there for me to be playing a lot of live cash. So what does that mean? That means I'm shifting over to playing a lot more tournaments, whether it being online tournaments or playing some live tournaments. I've been taking some trips recently to the World Series of Poker and just playing in more live tournaments. And I'm realizing that a lot of my cash skills, they translate to the deeper stacks portions of multi-table tournaments. But obviously, as you start shifting to different stack sizes, there's a lot of different range interplay, and really the games are just different games. And I have a lot to learn as I continue to develop as a tournament player. So a lot of my study is being focused in the MTT space. So as I'm creating content for Solver School, you're going to start seeing a lot of the content that I create is going to be shifting more towards MTTs, because that's really where I'm spending the majority of my own study. So my overall goal here, this is going to be actually a part of the overarching strategies that I'm building for myself in MTTs. The second goal here is to identify strategies that are simple to remember and simple to execute in game. And this is something that is really, really important to me. And it might be a little bit of an oxymoron to actually think of that when I actually get into my analysis itself and we start seeing how much data that we can actually look at here. It's going to look really, really complicated. We're going to start seeing that I've run a lot of simulations for various formations at various stack sizes across various flops. So we're going to have a lot of data that we can explore. And you might start looking at all of this data and start getting overwhelmed. Well, how can we remember all of the outputs of all of these simulations? And the answer is we're not going to. There's just no way that we can actually do that and create an easy to execute and easy to remember strategy. But what you are going to see, and what my hope in conveying throughout the course of these 4 videos, is you can take a lot of data and synthesize things down into simple and easy to execute strategies. So my goal here is to figure out where we can deviate somewhat from an equilibrium solution and without losing too much EV, and build some simple to execute strategies that are going to actually perform reasonably well. My goals here are to determine how stack size and position affects strategy somewhat. So what you're going to see here is that I've actually, while I'm going to be looking at one specific formation at one specific stack size, I've actually built out a number of databases at several different formations and using several different stack sizes. And the goal is to start training my intuition as to how, if we have a larger stack size or a smaller stack size, how that affects my overall strategy. And the same thing with position. If we move ourselves to an earlier position or a later position, how does that affect my overall strategy here too? So I want to start quantifying that somewhat and giving myself a better sense as to how should I be adjusting my strategies depending on what position I'm in, or depending on how the overarching stack sizes are for the 2 players that are in the given hands. I'd like to identify heuristics that I can use to guide my own strategies. So what are the characteristics of particular boards that can help me determine how I should play a particular flop? I'd like to make sure that that is incorporated into my overarching strategy. And then finally, I want to develop a framework that I can utilize for additional formations. I mentioned this up front at the top of the video here. This is meant to be a roadmap for not only for myself, but for you all as well too. We're going to look at one particular formation that we can potentially extrapolate into a few different formations, but we're only going to be looking at a single raise pot scenario. There are 3-bet pot scenarios. There are 4-bet pot scenarios. There are scenarios we're going to be defending the big blind as opposed to being the aggressor pre-flop. So we're going to end up having different parts of the game tree, different formations that we want to examine. And this hopefully will give us the roadmap or the framework that we can utilize to then kind of copy this analysis and look at it using a different set of ranges, or look at it using a different set of stack sizes. But ultimately, I want to see what works and what doesn't as I'm building out these overarching strategies, looking at this from a macro to micro perspective. The final output of this video series should really be a simplified game plan. So again, while we have a lot of data that we're going to utilize, ultimately I want to boil this down to one page where I can look at different types of boards and or different scenarios where I can just simplify my strategy as to different bet sizes, the different types of hands that I might be betting, and so on and so forth, that I can try to study, that I can train myself on using a GTO trainer, and that I can execute with a relatively high degree of accuracy, and something that is going to actually be successful in the MTT format. So let's take a look at the overarching formation that I plan to look at. So I'm a firm believer of starting when you're building out an overarching strategy. I'm a firm believer of starting with scenarios that are going to occur most frequently. So I hear multiple schools of thought on this. And some people will say, well, we should be studying river scenarios because the pot is going to be at its largest on the river, and those decisions mean the most. And while I do agree with that, and I think we should definitely be studying river parts of the game tree, we should be studying turn nodes and so on and so forth, those scenarios happen far less frequently. And if we don't have the fundamentals in place first, meaning if we don't have a firm grasp of our pre-flop ranges, and then if we don't have a firm grasp of our flop strategies, we're going to end up with poor ranges by the time we get to turns and rivers, that a lot of the tests that we might set up for ourselves for turns and rivers aren't going to be as accurate or situations that are going to actually reflect reality as to what we expect in game. So what I'm going to be doing here instead is I'm going to be starting with a flop scenario. I'm going to make the assumption here that I have pre-flop ranges down, and I have separate training for that. And I would highly recommend, if you are building out your own strategies, that you're starting with pre-flop and you're really drilling your pre-flop strategies and your pre-flop ranges. But I'm going to make the assumption that we have our pre-flop ranges down, and I'm going to actually start by building out my flop strategies. And for this particular scenario, I want to look at in position single raised pots where the big blind defends. It's going to be the most common scenario that we're in when we are the pre-flop aggressor. It's also a scenario where when I set up these solutions, I can use the same exact sims and conversely look at it from the big blind's perspective when I get to the point of studying big blind defense strategies. But that's for a future set of videos if we choose to go down that route. But really what I'm planning here to look at is the imposition scenario versus a big blind defense, a single raise pot. And what we're going to do here is I've chosen a hijack scenario as our in position hero position. The reason I chose the hijack is because it's really the middle range. If you take a look at a button opening range and an early position under the gun opening range, pretty much the middle point between those two opening ranges is the hijack opening range. As you shift over cutoff and button opening ranges, the hijack opening range is basically about halfway between a under the gun opening range and a button opening range. So we're going to look at a hijack opening range. That hijack opening range here is a 27% RFI range. It's 358 combos. This is the range on the left-hand side of the screen that I'm going to look at for a hijack opening range. And then for our opponents, the villain, the big blind, we have a defense range, which is fairly significant. It's a 66% defense range, which may look somewhat large if you are familiar with cash games, and it is large if you are familiar with cash games, but you have to remember that the opening sizes are smaller, stack sizes are smaller, so the big blind is going to be defending much more frequently. I sourced both of these ranges from a site called preflop.academy. They have a number of GTO solved equilibrium preflop ranges. There's really a number of sites. At this point now in 2022, there's a number of sites that have preflop solutions. Preflop.academy is one of those, but you can go to a number of other ones, whether it's Floptimal, whether it's Range Trainer Pro. There's a number of other sites that are going to have a set of preflop solutions that you can utilize. I've chosen just to use these preflop.academy ranges. I've adjusted them slightly, and I'll show you what I mean as we jump over into the setups of the solves a little bit. But what you end up seeing with these preflop solutions from a big blind defense perspective is they get very, very aggressive with their 3-butt ranges. And particularly as the stack sizes get smaller, a lot of pocket pairs are incentivized to just jam pretty significant stack sizes to an open from, particularly an open from later position. Now, while this is theoretically correct from an equilibrium perspective, I think you end up seeing folks in the big blind kind of dial that back somewhat in actual gameplay. So what I've done a little bit here is I've adjusted some of the hands that are either pure 3-bets or pure jams to be partial 3-bets or partial jams, and putting the other portion of actions of that particular hand combination into a defense range. And I'll go into that as we get into the ranges themselves. For the action itself, we are starting with a hero opening to 2.25 big blinds, and our opponent is going to be in the big blind, and it's going to be calling. Everyone else is going to be folding. So we end up with a pot size of 6 big blinds. Our effective stacks are 47.75 big blinds, which leaves us with an SPR of about 8. We're not going to be looking at one board. We're not going to be looking at a set of 100 boards or 184 boards or whatever the case may be. I've actually solved this scenario across all 1,755 strategically unique boards. So we're going to be looking at all boards and aggregating that up into a larger analysis across all of those different boards. You'll also notice here that the hijack has a lot more equity than the big blind in this particular scenario. So at a default, the hijack is going to have about 60% equity across all boards. That's the average. So some boards you're going to actually see the hijack have a greater equity advantage, whereas other boards you're going to see the hijack have a lesser equity advantage. And we'll see that in action when we actually dive into the boards themselves. Now, I mentioned here that we're not going to be looking at one particular formation. We're actually going to be looking at multiple scenarios. And I talk about that a lot in my masterclass course about how it's important to start comparing multiple solves together. And I'm a firm believer in actually just changing one variable but keeping everything else the same and comparing different solves together. So what I've chosen to do here, and I'll bring my mouse over so we can actually see this on the actual screen itself, is my primary focus of study here is this middle box, this 50 big blind stacks at the hijack versus big blind. And I've solved this scenario for all 1,755 boards, but I've also solved all of these other 8 scenarios for all 1,755 boards itself as well too. So I'm able to go upwards or downwards in multiple dimensions to examine this scenario. So our baseline analysis here is going to center around this middle position hijack open against the big blind defense. But I'm also going to examine outputs at earlier and later formations. So I have under the gun opens and button opens versus a big blind defense. And then using bigger and smaller stack sizes. So I have stack sizes at 25 big blinds and then 75 big blinds. So my theory here is by comparing the data outputs across multiple dimensions, whether it's stack size or position, we can start training our intuition as to how these variables are going to affect our overall strategies. So again, I'm still building out my strategy at that 50 big blind level, looking at hijacks versus big blinds. But if I can start seeing how the data adjusts from changing my position to a later position or an earlier position, or by changing my stack sizes to a larger stack size or a smaller stack size, I can hopefully study multiple formations really by incorporating all of those formations into one analysis and build out a more robust strategy that can handle virtually all imposition single raise pot scenarios at a variety of stack sizes. We can then really effectively just build out that comprehensive strategy that we can adjust depending on the exact in-game situation that we are in. So again, that's my theory for this particular analysis. We'll see how that actually plays out when we are diving into the data itself. But either way, I think this is going to give us a fairly robust data set that we can use to look at and build a pretty comprehensive strategy. So with that said, and I'll get into the parameters of my analysis in a second, but before I jump out of these slides, I do want to just really share what I plan to accomplish throughout the course of these 4 videos. So this video 1 is really just an introduction. So it's an introduction to the formation. So I've kind of gone through a little bit about that already here in the slides. I'm going to review the solver parameters. So we're going to hop over into Flopzilla and take a look at the formation and how those ranges interplay. But then we're going to look in GTO Plus, and I'm going to actually show you all of the parameters that I've utilized when I've actually setting up the GTO Plus database itself. And I'm finally going to go through the initial overview of the output data in Excel. So I haven't quite taken that data and put it into a really nice or fancy format to analyze everything just yet, but we'll take a look at what the data looks like now prior to the analysis portion. The macro to micro view is kind of just the way in which I like looking at these larger scale data analyses, and this video 2 is kind of starting at that macro level. So starting broadly, video 2 is going to focus on the examination of aggregate reports. So we're going to mostly spend our time in video 2 in Excel looking at those aggregate reports. I mentioned before that it's fairly difficult to look at 1,755 boards and dive into every single individual one. We're just not going to be able to remember the nuances of all of those outputs. However, as we aggregate those outputs across the larger 1,755 boards, and as we start looking at how that aggregates up at different levels of dimensionality, as we start breaking out the flops to its associated metadata. So, what are the suits on the board? What is the ranks of the cards on the board? Is the board paired or unpaired? So on and so forth. So characteristics of that flop. And as we aggregate all of the simulations at those different levels, we're going to be able to hopefully start identifying some strategy considerations based on those different board types, based on the different stack sizes and or other variables that we see in the data. Video 3 is when we start diving into the micro. So hopefully coming out of video 2, we're going to have some high level strategies that we can start trying to implement. So we may start seeing coming out of video 2 that there are certain types of boards that we can just bet range for a certain size. There are certain types of boards that we can default to particular strategies, whether it's playing a polarized strategy, betting 75% pot, or overbetting, or whatever the case may be. But there are going to be particular boards where it's going to require a little bit more nuance. And that's where we're going to start diving into the micro. And that's what video 3 is all about, is we're going to start diving into those individual situations, individual simulations where we are going to start trying to identify and develop different range construction heuristics and really find out if there are any exceptions to the strategies or nuances to the strategies that we've learned within video 2. And then finally in video 4, we're going to try to tie everything together. So we are going to really try to synthesize an overarching strategy, simplifying things as much as possible. As I mentioned, I want this to boil down to a one-page strategy that I can study and try to implement in game. So simplifying is going to be the key theme of video 4. We'll also spend a little bit of time thinking through the considerations we might have when deviating. So when different variables are added to the mix that maybe we don't necessarily consider in this view of theory, but if we're faced with different player profiles or if we're faced with different in-game scenarios, how might we be thinking about deviating from our baseline strategy? And then finally, I'll just do a little bit of a series wrap up and talk about what might come next in video 4. So again, I'm really, really, really excited about this series. I think this is something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time. Again, selfishly, I'm trying to become a better tournament player myself. So this is something that's going to be beneficial to me. It's also something that I plan to really use as a roadmap for myself as I continue my own tournament study. And I hope to shift this into other formations and or move into turn study, river study, and so on and so forth from there. So again, I'm really, really excited and ready to jump into the rest of this analysis. So with that, this primary goal here is to develop a process for building that flop strategy. And that flop strategy hopefully can be replicated across different additional parts of the games tree.
All right, so I'm extremely proud of this course. I think it's an amazing addition to the Solver Masterclass. And starting with that, if you're signed up for my entire Solver Masterclass, this course is already included. The Solver Masterclass is really just the entire course library of everything that I have at Solver School, and it includes 8 other modules that start with some very foundational concepts and works its way up to some advanced applications like the course that I just released here. But I think this course is so valuable that I decided to make this available for sale as a separate product. In the course itself, I use the example of building a strategy for MTTs. I use the example of a hijack versus button scenario at 50 big blinds deep. But this is a process that can be applied to virtually any poker situation that a solver can generate data for, whether it's 6-max cash games, whether it's full ring cash games, heads up, whatever the case may be. This is a process that's applicable to all of those. So let's start with, what do you actually get if you buy this course from Macro to Micro? Well, first off, you get 5 hours worth of video content that teaches you this exact process. Now, I do this in GTO Plus, but this same process can be applied to PO Solver. You're just setting up the solves, and a lot of the course I'm actually not working within the solver itself. I take the data out of the solver and work within an Excel spreadsheet because we're working with aggregated data reports. So you get access to the Excel spreadsheet that I use in the course to do all of my analysis work with the solver output data. And that includes things like all of the data visualizations, formulas, whatever the case may be. Everything in that Excel is yours to download so that you can reapply that for your own game and you can actually build upon that yourself. You get 9 full GTO Plus databases of all 1,755 strategically unique boards, solved down to 1% accuracy. I only look at this in the course itself for one formation, that's the hijack versus big blind scenario, but I solved all of these for hijack versus big blind, under the gun versus big blind, and button versus big blind at 50 big blinds deep, 25 big blinds deep, and 75 big blinds deep. So you have 9 full databases of 1,755 flops solved. That's almost 16,000 individual solves. That's seriously an insane value. I mean, if you were to ask somebody or go to a Discord server and have somebody else run all of these solves for you, they would probably charge you more than the price of this course alone to actually run those solves for you. So the GTO Plus databases alone are worth the cost of this course. And then finally, you get access to the Discord server for Solver School itself, where you can discuss this course as well as the Solver Masterclass with any of the other members of the Solver Masterclass. Now, the course is available on my website for $199, so you can head over to solver.school to pick it up there. And there you can also get the full Solver Masterclass available for $699, or you can get the Solver School Starter Pack, which contains a bunch of equilibrium-based pre-flop solutions ready to go to load into GTO Plus or PO Solver, also included in the Solver Masterclass. So I hope you check out the course. Again, I really think it's an awesome course. I'm extremely proud of it. And it's kind of a jumping off point for what I plan to do next in 2023 with Solver School. So make sure, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button for my YouTube channel. I'm going to start doing some more Solver study related live streams on my YouTube channel. So if you hit the subscribe button, you'll get notifications for when I am live, and you'll be able to join in along to live Solver studies periodically on the YouTube channel here. Thanks again, and I hope to see you in the group Discord server.